Hello and welcome to the Suzanne Atwell Show. I'm Suzanne Atwell. On the occasion of our first anniversary, we decided to take a look back at the people, places, and issues we have covered in the past year. We start with our very first show and Sarasota City Manager Tom Barwin. Our topic, lessons learned from Hurricane Irma, how we did, what we're doing, and where we're going.
A lot of lessons learned here. One is that I think we need to harden our infrastructure.
Yeah.
We had a lot of power outages here in the city. About 1.85% of our FPL's customers were without power. Fortunately, the city had pre-planned for some of that, and we had backup generators at the water plant, the wastewater treatment plant. I think what I would love to see us do, and there is a silver lining in all of this, I think we should go to work on having as much energy independence as possible, as much renewable energy as possible, looking at burying as many of our overhead lines as possible, look at individual grids for individual homes, backup generators, microgrids for neighborhoods. I mean, that's the big thing. And when you think about our world today, we're so interconnected, and we're so interconnected through technology. And what's going to happen when it just all goes kerplunk? I mean, it's tough. It's going to be chaotic. So we need to do things like that. We need to stabilize our shorelines over the next 50 years and really continue to stress, do everything you can do as an individual and as a community to do less harm to the environment, get the carbon out of the air, and minimize the future risks that we're creating if we don't do that. So we got to do two things at once. But if there's one takeaway that I would I will be communicating to the City Commission, we need to in the future look at a strategy called what I'm calling hardening and softening. Hardening our infrastructure to protect ourselves. So we have to look at all the shelters and be sure they have backup generators collaboratively with the state and the county. But then we need to also simultaneously, I think as citizens, do everything we can to minimize the potential environmental impacts of the future. As long as the oceans keep heating up, as long as the air temperatures keep heating up, it's just flat, straight science. We're going to experience heavier rainstorms, more volatile storms, and we'd be wise to prepare.
As Tom points out, we have a lot of work to do. Hurricanes and flooding are a way of life here in South Florida. Next, arts and culture. We sat down with Jim Shirley, Executive Director of the Arts and Cultural Alliance, to talk about the impact of the arts on our community.
The Arts and Cultural Alliance is meant to be the umbrella organization, or the organization that represents all of arts and culture. You think about, like, if we were the opera or the Aslo Repertory Theater, our job is to produce theater, to produce opera. That means that we're in those theaters and in those operas and we're working. But so many things happen with the arts in this community at the government level, at the business level, and we need a representative there to be involved and to be a part of decisions as they're being made. And that's really one of the big roles of the Arts and Cultural Alliance, is to be the voice, the advocate for the arts.
Absolutely, and the big word is impact. The amazing impact that you have on our economy.
And I think a lot of people are surprised when they see what that impact is. For example, if you take the nonprofit arts and cultural organizations in Sarasota County alone, not for-profit, but the nonprofit, they employ over 7,000 people. And the other thing that you see is that the arts and cultural organizations themselves spend almost $300 million a year buying goods and services from other businesses in the community. So it's not just a take situation, it's a lot of give back. We know that tourism is so big, not only in Sarasota, but in Florida. Each year, over 2.5 million people attend performances or exhibits with arts and cultural groups in Sarasota County, and over half of those are tourists. A lot of the people that come to Sarasota and find out about the arts and decide to live here are people who could live anywhere in the world they want. They are people who have been successful in their careers. They're in retirement. They're looking for a place where they can be engaged and retired. And what that does is that brings a high level of net worth to our community that might not be here otherwise. Then you look at the other end of the spectrum, and one of the things that we're looking at very closely is how do we attract and retain younger professionals in the community. You know, we hear it all the time in meetings in our business groups and in our government groups. And one of the programs that the Arts and Cultural Alliance has developed in collaboration with all of the arts groups is a program we call the Culture Collective. And what we're doing there is targeting a membership of young professionals between the ages of 21 and 39 who can get involved in the arts at a reasonable price. And we make it so that they're doing it together. And the interesting thing that's turned out of this is they're forming community together. Not only are they going to a production or to the orchestra or whatever that is, but they're going together, they're meeting other young professionals who have similar interests to them, and they're building community. And we all know that what has made the Sarasota community so great are people who love arts and culture, they like to be with each other, then they learn to support that arts and culture, and that's why you get the philanthropy that we have here, and that's one of our major goals, is to help to continue to develop philanthropists at all ages.
Supporting our vibrant performing arts is critical to the quality of life we enjoy here on the Suncoast. Part of that commitment includes the education of students. Unfortunately, budget cuts and financial pressures often threaten music, performance, and visual arts programs in our public schools. We dedicated several shows to education: charter schools, Parkland, and the School Safety Act. We begin with Lori White, the beloved former superintendent.
There are certainly incredible schools in this school district, but we live in a state where the funding isn't at the level that it's at many other schools and at many other states. And so that can be difficult in terms of elevating all schools to that high level. I think we do a wonderful job in this school district, particularly because we get additional funding through our voted millage that's made all the difference through some very tough years in the state funding, but that continues to be a challenge.
How does House Bill 7069 disrupt this equilibrium?
Well, in terms of the
Allocation of funding.
and our charter schools and certainly the concept of how to distribute operational dollars has been in place for a while. And charter schools are considered public schools, and they get the proportional share of those dollars. That's why it's so important as the LEA, as school districts approve a charter school, that they know that this is a charter school that can be successful and is worthy of being one of their schools in their school district. Our district has always been, I think, very fair to our charter schools. It's a high bar to get in, but once you're in, you're supported.
And that goes to the question, how much are parents educated to what their child is getting into with a different school if they're choosing another school? And that gets into the whole choice thing.
Sure, and that's really beyond charter schools.
Right, yes.
I find parents are very engaged in that process. They're perhaps less engaged if they're not looking for a choice school in terms of they're just going to their districted school. But I find that parents do their homework. I've always told parents, don't make a decision on a school based on the talk. Make a decision by visiting the school. See, I see some parents, they discount an option that they have and they've never set foot on the campus. They've never talked to that principal to find out what programs are offered there. So I really encourage parents to become very educated in the choices they have. That's their responsibility, and they live with that choice and their child lives with it. So do your homework, but not just on what you hear, but on-site visitations.
Going to teaching to the test, where are we on that, and how that paralyzes some efforts for good education when we're teaching to the test, as far as employing teachers? If the tests work out well, they will get a raise. I mean, that opens up a whole nother Pandora's box.
Well, and there's two parts to that. You have a very rigorous accountability system in the state of Florida that frankly I would welcome, because I think we owe it to our public to have visible means of how are we doing.
Standards.
And the standards, and when you say you're teaching to the test, in some ways you're teaching to those standards, which is appropriate. The problem in Florida is where they tried to use those scores for so many other purposes and getting it to the level of determining the effectiveness of a teacher, and it's only for those grade levels where you can have that comparison, so it's not all teachers where you really have that ability to use those assessments, and how you balance that with what the dynamics that are occurring from year to year in a classroom. So it's not to the point where we're saying we want to do away with all accountability, we want to do away with testing, but we have to be more cautious about how we use those assessments that were never designed for all those purposes.
From charter schools to school safety. Following the Parkland shooting, student protests were held across the nation and the state of Florida. Here in Sarasota, I joined an emotional and dedicated group that assembled at Bayfront Park. There was a clear sense that this is the start of a movement, the most powerful demonstration of teenage activism against gun violence ever. On March 14th, a month to the day after the shooting in Parkland, a national school walkout was held. Close to 1 million nationwide left their classrooms for 17 minutes in memory of the 17 who died that day. At Sarasota High, the scene was orderly but emotional. Some shouted in anger, some cried. All were articulate and dedicated to change.
I think the meaning of today is to honor the victims of the Parkland shooting, and our school is directly doing this through advocating for the closure of School Avenue. However, I think on a nationwide basis, we need to be promoting more gun legislation and gun control and gun reform on a nationwide basis.
It's so easy right now in our world to get an assault weapon that really is not used for self-defense, but is honestly a killing machine. And it's so easy. If we ban assault weapons, we won't need to close School Road, and we won't need to have much more security, and we won't need to have cops risking our lives on this school campus.
I'm here because I connected so much to those students. Seeing the images from inside that school was so powerful that they took. It really let me get an idea of what it felt like to be in that situation and how terrifying that would be. So, like, hearing those gunshots and everyone screaming and seeing those horrible images was really powerful to me.
I was talking with my anatomy teacher, and I thought what she had told me today was so much better than what this walkout could have brought us. She said instead of walking out, maybe we could walk up to people who are lonely at lunch, to people who don't seem to have any friends. Maybe it could prevent stuff from happening, like shootings. Maybe it can prevent suicide and depression. And I thought what she said really affected me, and I appreciate that.
Under extreme political pressure, lawmakers in Tallahassee passed the most comprehensive school safety and gun control bill in the country. We talked with Sarasota County Superintendent Dr. Todd Bowden.
This internal police department will have one singular focus, and that's the protection of our schools. I also think it's important that as we talk about the school safety officer, is that an officer on a campus does not make the campus safer. It is part of a system. And so the fact that that officer is employed by the district allows us to direct their efforts, simplifies the chain of command, and allows us to integrate them into a system of safety and security.
Also, I wanted to talk to you about this helping to identify suspicious activity, a reporting tool called Fortify Florida.
Yes.
Talk to me about that. It's been established to allow students and members of the entire community to report their perceived dangerous threat through perhaps a mobile app. What's that all about?
You know, we talked about the role of an officer on campus. You know, that's 2 eyeballs. We have 60-acre campuses, 70-acre campuses. It can't just be one person's job to keep a campus safe. And in many cases, you know, our students aren't comfortable coming forward, but they're more comfortable in an anonymous environment. And so be it someone in the community, be it member of our school community, a student, a parent, a teacher. It's just a way of raising a red flag and saying, hey, did you know there's this condition that exists on your campus, or there's this student that attends your school, or there's this individual in our community that you ought to be aware of. Very rarely is it that we have one of these mass shootings on a school campus where in an after-action review there weren't all kind of red flags.
Nicholas Cruz of Parkland had a threat assessment 6 months before this all happened. He went through this process. Who makes up this threat assessment team? Who's in charge of that, and what's the membership?
And so I will tell you that's one of the best things to come out of the act, is that there are a number of agencies, and certainly when you look at the shooting in Parkland at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, there were all kind of flags. There were a number of agencies that interacted with Mr. Cruz, but they weren't coordinating their efforts. And so I'm so glad you asked about that, because we spend so much time on the officer side of it, is that I've been attending meetings with an umbrella organization in which it's kind of the mental health providers, it's the social service side of our community, where we're sharing information like never before.
So what would you tell the parents of students that may be watching our show when it airs, 2 specific things they can do to make sure their kids are safe?
First of all, I don't want the phrase to ever get tired, that if you see something, say something. You never want to be the person that says there was a flag and I didn't escalate it. And so if you see something, say something. The other is, our students need reassurance. And so talk openly with your child. We don't need to scare our kids, but we need to make sure that they have an honest viewpoint of what's going on. We have altered the physical environment of our schools. We've added these officers. And so that may be disconcerting if you're 5 or 6 years old, is why is there a man with a gun at my school? I certainly didn't think as superintendent that this was part of my scope of work. I felt comfortable making academic decisions, budget decisions, but literally we're having to put plans in place that allow us to defend our schools from lone gunmen. It's a different job. But with our kids, they view things differently. And so to draw that out of them and just have conversations. If you're at one of our elementary schools, if you have a student at one of our elementary schools, I would encourage you to go out of your way to introduce yourself to the officer. We want them to be part of those communities, to connect with them and understand it's not just a badge and a gun, but it's a man or a woman who cares deeply about your child.
Since our interview with Dr. Bowden, there was a major shakeup at the top of the school police department. This is a huge step for the district, which will hopefully keep our classrooms safe. Next, greyhound racing in Florida. It was banned by voters in the November election, and that's a good thing, but it will mean lots of dogs will need a good home. Earlier this year, we did a show on greyhounds and talked to a dedicated owner.
They are so incredibly lovable, so sweet, so docile. I think some people have a misconception that they need all kinds of exercise and they run and everything. Nothing could be further from the truth. They're lazy as sin, lovable, just absolutely terrific. They don't need any space at all. They rarely bark, although I have to tell you, we've had 4, and the first 3 collectively never barked. And Madison makes up for all 4 of them, because she barks just like any other normal kind of dog. We looked at her first, that's a greyhound. She's not supposed to bark, but she does.
Here she is.
That a girl.
Welcome. Welcome. Thank you for having us in your home. You are beautiful. Hello. You want to look at the camera? Oh, there. Yes, there. You just, oh, you're beautiful. Thank you for coming over. What would you, for people that would like to adopt a greyhound, what are some concerns that you think they ought to have about before they adopt? Should they have the dog meet their children, other dogs in the family, many people in the family? What are some of those concerns?
Well, our children were young adults by the time we got our first greyhound, so that was not an issue for us. But I think people think they're big. I don't think of her as big. I think of her as normal, but they are tall.
Right.
She weighs about 72 or 73 pounds, so if you live in a place that has restrictions as to the size of your pets, that might be an issue. But they really are very easy to care for. Now, our first 3 were all black and never shed. She is fawn-colored and
Yeah,
sheds
I've
all
noticed.
the time.
Yeah, she's shedding. Yeah.
But the truth is they really don't require a lot of work. They just are part of the family. They're very, very gentle. They love people. They, unfortunately, when people come in the door, she jumps on them and says hello. We
Yeah.
try and keep that under control.
When I know with veterinary care, are there any concerns about any specific veterinary issues, whether orthopedic, whether neurological or whatever, that's different than any other dog?
Well, they have orthopedic problems if they're young because of their racing.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, broken legs are not an uncommon experience. Madison, fortunately, has not had that issue. But no, there are, I know time to time there's talk about greyhounds having kidney issues. But in general, we've had 2 that lived to be 12, which is about what their life expectancy is. And 1, unfortunately, passed away of cancer at age 7. But 11, 12 years old is about what you'd expect, and they're just, they're a member of the family, totally.
Like Richard, there are thousands of volunteers in charitable organizations in Sarasota. One of our shows focused on the community foundations that do so much. Case in point, the Patterson Foundation.
Our mission is to strengthen people, organizations, and communities. And that's a very broad definition because the way we work is through initiatives that we have selected and figured out that it matches our values.
You talk about partnerships. Well, back up a moment before. What are some of your wide-ranging partnerships?
Let me give you an example of the National Campaign for Grade Level Reading. There are over 330 communities engaged in getting children successful by 3rd grade in reading. And why that's important, you read to learn from birth to 3rd grade. 4th grade, you read to learn. Okay, so you learn and then you read. 4th grade is when dropouts start. And so it's a complex with many ways to address it. There's no single program, no single agency, no single policy. So how do you work on that? So there's 330 communities nationally working on it. The Patterson Foundation actually works in the national level to help people learn and share from those communities. But then locally, we have the Suncoast Campaign for Grade Level Reading in our 4-county region, where every county is approaching it differently. But we, the Patterson Foundation, as the Suncoast, help facilitate communication between, leveraging opportunities that one might be doing that could help the other 3, or we can download best practices from national and bring it to all 4 counties. The Patterson Foundation, we use 5 words. Connect, learn, share, evolve, and strengthen. Us, whoever we work with, are those 5. We're always thinking about those 5 words. So we know we're going to evolve. We don't know, but right now we have 16 initiatives that we are working on. They all have a life cycle. We stay in as long as, here's another 5 words that we use. As we work in partnership with others, we look through a lens of, is there alignment of leadership, willingness, readiness, capacity, and culture? So while I don't know what we're going to do in 5 years, I know we're going to evolve as we continue to learn and say, well, okay, what is this better? And do we have alignment of who we are working with?
Sure, and I think our community will be served well because it will reflect what's going on in the community, this amazing community.
Yeah, we have many phrases that we use. One is don't arrive with the answer. Because everybody has opinions. Everybody should be part of the aspirations of what we want to create for the future. So the Patterson Foundation really looks through the future, not solving the problems today, even though you think the Campaign for Grade Level Reading could be solving a problem. We're not. We're creating the next generation of people who will be successful.
And you're helping people navigate to these solutions.
Yeah, so it's just, we help create time and space for people to create the future that they want.
One of the challenges we all face here in Paradise is red tide. This year has been one of the worst on record. We recently dedicated a show to red tide, and one thing was very clear. It is going to take everyone working together to mitigate this problem.
What we're seeing now, I think, is people becoming people understanding that we now need to take action. That the days of saying, oh, it's a natural organism and, you know, and it comes and goes, well, there's no question that red tide is a natural organism, but there is also absolutely no question what feeds red tide. And we can, and we now must coalesce, come together to demand action from the policymakers on a broad spectrum. But we've got to deal with Okeechobee in a number of ways. And we've got to deal with the water treatment plants where they have outflow problems. And we, for God's sakes, the idea that we are not monitoring septic tanks in the state of Florida and that we are allowing that is ridiculous. And we've got to get serious, and we've got to demand action on stormwater issues. And we've all got to take a part, and we've all got to own part of this. And we've all got to do our part in our own yards, so that what we're putting on our yards, what we're putting on local farms, what we're putting on commercial landscaping is not detrimental to our environment.
In your aquaculture business, how is that going to have to change? How is the management of that going to change along with everything else?
Well, you know, we have an opportunity here because we're the only place in the country that has 3 national estuaries on its border. Tampa Bay, Sarasota Bay, and Charlotte Harbor. And we are the best place in the world to raise bivalves. And guess what? Bivalves are part of the solution, because clams, which is what does so well in this area. We got 287,000 acres of shellfish approved waters in the state of Florida. We need aquaculture to feed people, but aquaculture cleans water. Out of that 287,000 acres, only 1% are leased. Every clam that we put in the water here under aquaculture now will clean 40 to 50 gallons of seawater a day. And it will promote the benthic environment. It will grow more seagrass. All of that contributes to cleaning up water. So we've got to do a whole broad spectrum of things so that we're making sure that we are doing our part to not feed a naturally occurring organism, to not be having to worry about we're at a tipping point. You know, this thing comes, we feed it, it keeps going. Nobody wants to look into that abyss.
The dead fish and closed beaches have stopped for now, but red tide has not gone away. Miles offshore in the Gulf of Mexico, prevailing winds and tides can bring it back at any time. While the crisis has prompted action in Washington and the creation of a new red tide initiative at Mote Marine, we are far from being out of danger. This is an issue that threatens our economy, the environment, and our quality of life. Like Ed said, we all have a part to play in the war against red tide. Hope you learned something from our program and enjoyed taking a look back on the year in review. You can watch this show and all our previous shows on Facebook, YouTube, and my website, SuzanneAtwell.org. That wraps up this show. Thanks for joining us. And as always, we'll see you around town.